Writing is about the process. It's about listening and recognizing remnants of your story in the stories of others. When we share our stories with each other, we share the resonance of the human experience. The By Firelight podcast is your invitation to join our circle, a circle of writers, poets, seekers, and storytellers as we capture our living in words. This multifaceted living with joy, grief, love, growth, and loss is shared among us in your legacy, your story. The things you choose to do with your days as they unfold matter here. I'm your host, Betsy Delzer. I'm many things, but in this gathering, I'm a painter, poet, and writer, and I'm honored to be your guide through these episodes. Together, we'll find our muses in the rich and heart-expanding conversations with incredible guests, many who are like minds and all outrageously inspiring hearts. When you press play, you're here in the circle to share this space with us. By Firelight.
Karen Rigsby describes herself as a child of the mystery, or whatever moniker you'd like to assign to the one that brought us here, should you believe in that. After that, she is a wife and mom, daughter, sister, and dog mom, and a girlfriend to a precious few. She's a quiet introvert and a yoga teacher, an easy crier and a strength coach. Karen also is a cancer survivor and a 2-time Olympic medalist. She's all these things while she tries to figure out why she's really here. In this conversation, you'll hear some of that answer as Karen speaks in a river of poetry, simply in her awe-inspiring word choice. We talk yoga and yoga teaching, purpose and connection, as well as how writing in any format, from napkins to scrap paper, can qualify us as writers, or at the least, capturers of the divine mystery she alludes to in this introduction. Thanks for being here. Karen, I am so excited for this conversation. I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to it. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. I think I'm just as excited as you are.
Before we really roll into this, as we were preparing for our time together, we both discussed the fact that we are sympathetic and empathic criers. So as just a statement out there as we begin, we want to open our hands and hearts to the possibility that there may be tears. And that's not something we hear every day in a podcast. But if that happens, it may not, but if it does, we'll sort of ride the waves of that and we'll welcome that expression of emotion. I think crying is one of the most gracious and beautiful gifts we were given in our humanity and in our expression of humanity. So when you told me I'm a crier, I'm going to cry on this podcast, I was like, yes, bring it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we really introduce you to the world of our listeners, what would your younger or older self want to tell us right now?
I think I'm going to go with the older self. When I was younger, there was a lot of things I kept inside, and I don't know if I would have had a voice to say what I was thinking or feeling, or if I had a voice, I didn't know how to use it. So I'm going to go with my older self. And I think, because I'm hearing whispers of that already, she would tell us to rest. And not to wait until all the work is done before we rest, but to rest in a rhythm with the work. And that's something I'm working on, but it's in my nature to check off all the things on my list before I sit down or before I take a deep breath. And so inserting rest like a space bar in between all the words, inserting a rest, whether it's a yoga practice or a few moments or a few deep breaths, so that the swirling can subside before it begins again.
I love that. As you were saying the space bar, it brought to mind this idea of one of the names that was on the list for my son, which was Dash. And the reason it was Dash was not because of a little superhero or or that I was trying to manifest him being really fast on the track, but it was the space. It was the space that a dash creates, the space between. And you brought that up. I have so many questions, Karen, and I'm so excited for our time. But while we're talking about children's names, I love your daughter's name. And I'm just wondering, because this is a podcast about words and writing and really heartfelt living, how did you choose your daughter's name?
Well, it started in the work to have her. It was a long process, a decade of trials. So when we were finally able to hold on to her physiologically in the womb, we just wanted to just roll around in the sensation that we were going to be parents because it had been a decade of trying. And my husband had a family name way back in the late 1800s, and it was Revel, Revell. And we really liked actually the word revel, meaning just to enjoy all the things, all the small things, all the big things. And so we named her Revelry as a reminder for us to revel in her existence, and also for a reminder for her to revel in all the things. It's easy to box things out when they don't fit into your paradigm, but all the things make us who we are. And so to revel in the moments in between all the big things, to revel in the not so great moments, the harder moments, the grieving moments, all of that is what life is. And so you live it more if you revel in it. And so it's a reminder both to us and to her. Just be so joyous that she's here.
I couldn't love that anymore. My daughter's name means blooming joy. That was what I was embodying with her in me. And then with my son, when I was pregnant with him, I wanted something that like sort of mimicked that. So his name means happy and spirited. And I feel like both have really come to life in their humanity. So I love that.
Power of manifestation.
That's right. I'd love to introduce you as this brilliant light that you are. As my yoga teacher. That is our original connection. And we will kind of travel back down the road of yoga because I think there are listeners who are curious about yoga as a practice and yoga as a lifestyle. So I'd love to go down that road. But first, aside from our unity in that practice and that connection, what else about your life would you like us to know? Like, give us a little taste of like a living memoir, just to the degree that you want to, about kind of the framework of your career or your passions, or a little bit about who you are.
I'm a recovering perfectionist, something I'm working on shedding as a layer of myself. I believe in the great mystery, although I don't know how to define it. I think that's what makes it so great, is that it's outside my ability to comprehend. And as a consequence of that, I see life as an unfolding mystery itself. Not that everything has to have great consequence or great purpose, but I do believe everything is connected. I believe we are connected within ourselves. And obviously that's the practice of yoga, finding that reconnection that we've kind of disintegrated. As we've become more and more advanced in society, we've become unadvanced, if that's a word, in our ability to bring ourselves back home together in pieces and parts. And I also believe we're connected as people in the quantum theory of things. Just we've been entangled in some way, and there's so much connection that we find coincidentally sometimes, but I really believe that there's something stronger than that. Besides that, I am a wife and a mother and a girlfriend and a sister and a daughter and all those things. I teach yoga. I have coached rowing. I have been a rower. I am a strength coach. I'm kind of all over the map while I figure out what I'm really supposed to be doing here on this earth.
Mm-hmm. You have such a knowledge of the musculoskeletal. Like, I've never been guided by a yoga teacher who seems to know the body. Is that from your athletic and strength coach background, or where does that come from?
I think it comes initially from my own journey in becoming an athlete, and that came late in life. So I was a little more aware of how it was happening, kind of the process of that athleticism blossoming. But it also became part of me as I was a grad student at UW in exercise physiology. So I learned kind of academically those parts and pieces, but truly it came as a yoga practitioner. It became more and more somatic rather than just cerebral. So I kind of embody what I feel and then find the words for that rather than finding the words and trying to embody it. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it really does. How did you find yoga? What, did you start practicing a long time ago? Was it something that you found through your athletic journey?
Yes. And yes, I started it as kind of an academic endeavor when I was in grad school, not seeking it as a peaceful gap in between my stresses, but more as another avenue to study the body. And so I started coming to Inner Fire, which is where I teach now, in 2001, and had some wonderful teachers that just hooked me. It was kind of that first class, I'm never doing this again. That was so hard. And then a year later, I think I'll try it again. And then 3 times a week for the rest of my life. So that's how it started. And then I found like all those little things that people talk about why they seek yoga. I found those kind of sneaking up on me, just the adaptogenic qualities of yoga. So if you're super stressed, it can calm you down. If you're super lethargic, it can give you energy. I've always been a procrastinator. I think that's one of the maladies associated with perfectionism. The procrastination part actually started to resolve itself. I started tackling those projects I'd always put off. And I realized that was probably due to the yoga, but I can't really put my finger on why. I just had a clearer energy about things. I was going to take things head on instead of waiting until it was the last thing on my list and I had to do it before I could rest, that kind of thing. I think what snuck up on me is the ability to look at things without being fearful of whether or not I was going to do them perfectly and just do them anyway. And that came from yoga because I wasn't doing yoga perfectly and it was still giving me great joy and benefit and clarity and all the things. So why not take on these other tasks with the same vigor?
How did you decide to become a teacher?
I decided to follow teacher training, not to become a teacher initially. It was just to take a deeper dive into the asanas, the sensations of it, still kind of in a cerebral way, because I was still in grad school trying to understand the physiology and the biomechanics of the body. I started steering my coursework towards the biomechanics as I found yoga so interesting in all the angles and how putting yourself in these awkward shapes, why that was healing for your connective tissue and how our stories are held in that connective tissue. And so that's what piqued my curiosity. And so I started the teacher training in 2003. And to pay back the favor that the teacher had allowed me to take this teacher training with a deep discount because I was a grad student and didn't have the cash, I owed her kind of an indentured servanthood afterward. And so I had to teach whether I wanted to or not. And so as scary as that was for an introvert, I just took the bull by the horns. And here we are 20 years later with the best job of my life.
Oh, yeah. So you finished grad school, you've finished yoga teacher training, you're teaching yoga. Where is your life oriented on your compass at that point, or the map, so to speak?
I love the yoga, but I also love the strength coach part. So I had been a rower for the last 10 years before grad school. And while in grad school, I had been recruited to coach rowing. And so I loved that part of connecting with the students. I love that part of trying to find ways to articulate what my body knew how to do to help the students, the athletes, learn what to do. And I loved that journey. But the part of the rowing coach job description was a lot of things I didn't enjoy. The recruiting part was difficult and it required a lot of hours, way more than 40. And so this is during the time we were trying to have a family. And so I moved away from that, but also started strength coaching at a gym because I really liked the coaching part while I was teaching yoga. So I love the strengthening as well as the stretching. I love how it changes your inner narrative when you feel yourself getting stronger, which you can do on the mat as well. I liked teaching it in the gym. So I was integrating those two halves, kind of the yin and the yang. And I loved doing that. And then we became pregnant with Rev. And then my world just kind of became this white hole of focus on her. And it's still that, but yoga came back first and strength coach part of me came back just about a year ago.
Just wondering, because we're both, on the, what do we call this? The back half, right? If we are afforded a long life. And I'm curious, I know there are a few people who are regular listeners who are into like strength training as we're aging. And I'm just wondering a small question about what about folks who maybe aren't super comfortable with the gym or don't exactly know where to begin, and like 2-minute reels or 20-second reels on Instagram that they're watching are maybe not hitting their workout. Like, how do you give a little bit of inspiration or coaching to somebody? And in full disclosure, I might be talking about myself. I'm like making up this fictional character who is actually me. I can rock the yoga mat for days, and I just walk into the gym and I'm like, I think I just want to do the sauna today.
I can identify with that. I can.
But I know it's important, especially as we're aging, and I'm like, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon and all these people are telling me I need more muscles. So what advice do you have for those of us who are coming late to the machines or dumbbells?
I think that it doesn't have to be hours and hours, honestly. I enjoy working out, so I have a hard time switching that off and imagining what it feels like to not want to work out, although there's many days where I don't. I just know I will feel better when I do, and that's what gets me over the hump. But I do think that it changes kind of the narrative between our ears when we think that life is just going to happen to us and we just kind of roll with it instead of turning to face it. So we engage the fight part of our sympathetic, not the flee, not the flight, but just put up your dukes against it and say, no, I'm here to stay. I have some things to do. And taking that attitude to the gym or to your own little space, doesn't have to be a gym, where you can do your exercises, and it could be short if you don't enjoy it, but you do your exercises as a proof to yourself that you are not the victim of your story, but you are the hero of your story. And that's the switch that happens. And then sometimes you even get into a flow state where you actually find that you like it. Maybe.
Okay. I like, as soon as you said it was a hero, I was like, okay, I'm walking into the gym with a cape on next time. No,
exactly. Flip it behind your ears.
Flip it. I'm just going to work that. No, I love that. As we think about yoga and the yoga teaching aspect, that for me feels like a very enjoyable topic to think about. And I can totally relate to, I also did yoga teacher training as a very, very happy art teacher who had no plans of actually teaching, but wanted to learn more and deepen the practice. We could talk for hours and hours and hours and days, and we probably will and have in our past about this, but we're going to probably meander now down the corridor of like a little bit deeper into the stairwell of our hearts as we talk about yoga, because I think one thing that we both have in common is kind of the spiritual heritage that remains somewhat of our root system. And then we have kind of come through the earth several times, and then I feel like died and reborn several times, right? Like through several iterations, whether it's been our own deconstruction and reconstruction, et cetera, of our spiritual journey. Along those lines, what part do you feel like you have healed through your yoga practice in your spiritual life and living?
That's a really great question. I think, as I just briefly alluded to, my younger self, my first dad passed away when I was young, and my mom remarried to a wonderful man who had traumas of his own in his childhood. And so he kind of, not willingly, not knowingly, brought those traumas to my childhood. And he did not know love from his family. He grew up in an orphanage. So the way he parented was with rules and discipline and with quiet. So I didn't have a voice. I couldn't voice contrary opinions. I couldn't voice questions because he didn't know how to let me do that. And I think that trauma took a long time to A, recognize, B, know the symptoms of, and how that was manifesting in my own partnership and my own relationships before we had Revel, because I didn't want to parent that way, but I didn't know another way. And so that, I think, healed through a yoga practice where I could take up space. It healed through my yoga teaching where I had a voice, and it healed in ways where I can empathetically feel other people that are healing their traumas too, because I've kind of tuned my antenna to that, not knowingly, but because I know what that energy feels like. I can feel it if it's coming off someone in a yoga room. And so all of that, recognizing A, I'm not the only person that is going through that, and B, realizing that those stories that we hold in our bodies, as we peel down layers and let the ocean salt that we're made of come out either in tears or sweat or however it comes out, that is ways of letting go of that trauma. And it comes to the surface, and it connects us to other people as it comes to the surface, because we start to see those commonalities. That connection is part of the healing, knowing that we're not doing it by ourselves. And it's also part of the healing to let your body just let go of all those emotions stored in that connective tissue, because our body knows the language of feelings. Our head knows the language of thoughts, but that's why sometimes they get disconnected, because they're working on different planes.
There's so much to savor in your language. And I think of that even as I took your class before this interview and our time together. But there's so many times when I am drawn both into my body, but also into, I think it's a state of awe by the way that you use your voice. And this might be where we start crying. I was even just making small notes today. You know, there are things that you say where you're living and you're breathing poetry. And it's been exemplified so far, like even in this short time that we've been together on microphone this morning, everything you say, it feels like I'm carrying the most beautiful butterfly or blossom in my hand, and I'm just wanting to stare a little bit longer, right? Like that's how it's landing on me, like everything you say. And it's really true in how you teach yoga as well. I mean, you really cue with it's an art form, and it doesn't feel like an art form that can be taught. I will say that. Like I noticed there were yoga teacher trainees in the room this morning, and I was like, those poor people.
Oh, Bets.
Because in the same way that we can't, like a potter or a sculptor cannot make a tiger lily the same way, right? Like it is just part, you are the blossom. So I'm so glad that you worked with your throat chakra and all the other chakras, your heart chakra, to open into the space of finding healing and using your voice. That's why we're mat to mat, week to week, and why your classes are just so truly, truly, truly one of my life highlights.
Thank you. Thank you, Bets.
Yeah. I was thinking, like, is there an asana or something that you love cueing, or is it just a moment that you're riding on? Is there something that you're like, oh, I really love getting people into this shape and like how to construct it, because you're constructing it physically, but you're constructing us spiritually as well. Is there a particular posture that you love, or do you just kind of like ride the experience of a class?
I think it's mostly the latter, although Warrior 1 and Warrior 2 seem to me where I can transcend the biomechanics of it. Just the warrior ethos, if you will, like what a warrior is, and their mindset, the mind of no mind, it just being letting the thoughts come and go and not attaching to them, while you find stability in your lower half and openness or closure in your upper half. I think the way that I see the postures is part of when I alluded earlier to being a student of the mystery. I feel like I'm just in awe of how different bodies come to the mat and express a warrior pose and what it looks like, and how their Warrior 1 from one Saturday to the next could be completely different depending on their week, and how much that expression shifts in a few breaths. And that brings me awe. And as I watch that unfold in 75 5 bodies in a 105-degree room, it gives me goosebumps room because it's just people connecting to their innermost self and letting salt crystals come to their skin, and whether they humble their warrior or exalt their warrior or ring out their warrior, it moves me. And so it makes it easier to cue the metaphysical part besides the biomechanical part. So do I have a favorite? It would probably be one of the standing warriors, because that's where I can see what unfolds in the room. It's not necessarily the shape itself, but what I can see in the shape.
I think we both agree and can just really identify with the love that we have in teaching and in the room itself. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's palpable.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to take a small turn toward the rough and smooth edges of the tumbled stones of our interior landscape. Okay. Like the interior beaches. Is writing for you an expression of that look inside? Is it an expression of both the outward glance, inward glance? What has been your experience as a writer? And maybe it's just starting with a container of, do you just jot in a notebook, or, you clearly, everything you say could be written down. We could put this all in voice text and it could be a published book. You just speak so beautifully. But how do you put it down on paper or into captured words?
It's sometimes just grabbing my phone. I remember listening to Jen Brady's podcast, and sometimes it's in a notebook, sometimes it's on a 3x5 card, sometimes it's on a napkin, just capturing a moment with a word that comes to mind or a word picture. I'm kind of this strange construction of left brain, right brain. And so a lot of my life before yoga was left brained. As I find the right brain side, I kind of like it in there. And so I lean that way when I can. And sometimes when I lean into that, pictures come up. So it's in all shapes. And sometimes a journal is full of napkins and the back of some pamphlet or voice to text notes to myself on my phone. I have journals from when I was 7. So a whole bookcase of journals. And I think that's where I initially found my voice, that I wasn't allowed, or I didn't feel allowed to express. And when I look back on them, those are the stories at some point I'd like to collect through a lens of looking back on them through retrospect and say, these are the stories I tell now, whereas the stories I told then were of kind of a victim mindset. And as I look back through lenses of what's happened, what I've been able to do through the healing process of some of that hurt, the stories I tell now are different because the lens is different. And I think if you tell the same story over and over again, you start to believe it as the truth. But if you look at it through a slightly different lens, there might be a slightly different truth. And so I think what I seek in writing is the truth that is positive, the truth that can heal, the truth recognizes the trauma, but is still working, because we're not done yet. And the evolution of the story is not done yet. Mm-hmm. So I don't really consider myself a writer in the way that Joe or Jen express their writing, because I haven't actually sat down and written to write. It's more kind of a catharsis or just a release, a crying, if you will, through the pen, or a describing a moment just to capture it and hold it like a photograph. I don't identify as a writer yet.
That's perfectly perfect, right? In the way that I feel like there are so many people who have reached out since this podcast started and who are saying, like, I'm not a writer. I don't know where to begin. I'm not sure what to do. And I love that I'm talking to like a poetic goddess that they can hear say, I'm not a writer. and we can make you t-shirts, people, because I believe
Writers Anonymous.
Writers. I feel like, to be honest, like I come from the lens of being an art teacher who had small children just stand on their stools and say, I'm an artist, and just to practice the identity of being an artist, And so I hear you say you're not a writer. And I will embrace that, and I love what you write. So whatever identity that falls under or category it falls under, when you crack open, what I know to be like your notebook, and I know that you're reading an original piece in class, I get this little flurry of excitement because I love you speak it, but then when you let it land somewhere and then I can go back and hear it again, it's such a gift. So did you bring anything today that you'd like to share?
I did. This is something I read for class that a few people asked for afterwards. So that was validating enough for me to be able to read it on the podcast. It was just a gratitude statement for the people that showed up as they were in child's pose. This is what I read. Thank you for folding up on your mat today. Whether today is hellish or beautiful for you, or one of those precious in-between days, may the chaos help us know disorganization as a friend and a motivator. And may we find peace even in the middle there. May we use this time to sit in it and let it whirl around us. We can fold into the quiet together and feel the ocean water salt coming to the surface, whether it's in our sweat or in our tears. Let's revel in the whispers of our truest self that are so soft, we must find an entirely new way of listening in stillness and in quiet and with space and time in which to enjoy them, one deep breath at a time.
Would you be willing to say a couple of words about when you're reading that and the emotion comes up and it comes to the surface? Can you identify what is in the heart space there, or a thought or a feeling even that might be attached?
Today, it's because when I read that, one of the women that came up and asked me to send that to her after class, she said that today was one of the hellish days and that she had always been someone that ran away, the fight, flight, flee. She was a flee person, and it was the first step in that class she took to not freeze, to flow, just to flow in it and be in the middle of it. And while it was frightening, she was able to stay. And so when I just read that now, the conversation conjured up that sensation when she told me that, because I teared up and we hugged, and it's just the connection point. I think that's why we're here, is to connect. And so when something feels strong enough for me to write it down, and then it's strong enough for someone else to tell me that they identify, that was meant, it was supposed to happen.
I can guarantee. I just can, in the way that the mystery, the great mystery, as you referred to, and the world works, and the way our splintered living works. There's someone listening right now who's in the hellish, right? And I love your line about soften together. Can you read just that little stanza again? The folding together or soften.
Fold into the quiet so we can feel the ocean water salt of our soul, soften into the sweat and revel in our whispers of our truest self.
This has been such an amazing hour. Did you have anything else you wanted to read?
This one's kind of a short just statement about me, so it's a good way to finish.
Okay.
I am grateful today. I am grateful today for who I have become, for all the me's that came before. I am grateful I am this one now. Yes, there is a whole universe of space for improvement, but those are me's for days to come. I hope and trust that I can become prouder still. I'm grateful to the angels and the ancestors and the guides and the beloved friends and the animals and the absence of things I longed for and the bounty of things I've ignored. I am thankful for all these things, for the way they have gently nudged me into being this me today. I am the casserole of all the choices I have made thus far, choices I would make again in a heartbeat, and some choices I have loathed myself for. Today, in light of all the traumas I have endured and all of the dis-ease I have caused others, Today I am a softer version of the one that saw only black and white. Today I see not only the grays, but the technicolor spectrum of possibilities that are still mine to become. I'm grateful for the tapestry of my soul, torn and faded, threadbare in parts, but a vibrant story woven of my choices. A story I am still here to tell.
A story you are still here to tell, and we're brave enough to come on here and tell. And I'm so abundantly grateful. When you're talking about you, I could reflect on me and also see you, and that is it, right? That is it. That is our union. That is our communion.
Our resonance, to use your word.
Yes. And I think also the truest part of you is your light, right? The truest part of me is my light. And I think the thing I've learned again and again through my body and through my practice and through your voice and your spirit guiding me has been the truest version of us is our light. So thank you for shining so bright in my actual life and right here on the podcast. I'm so glad we worked through the technical elements that brought us here, and also worked through just our bravery to be willing to kind of pull out the paddles and row through the tears as well, right?
Yes, thank you for doing that with me.
Yes, anytime. Is there anywhere that people should find you, or if they are curious about taking a class of yours or following back up with you as strength coach or yoga teacher, where could people find you from here?
You can find me teaching a class at Harbor Athletic Club. It's a Friday morning, 8:30. You can find me at Inner Fire many of the days of the week. A special tribe of people gather at 7 a.m. on Saturday mornings. Inner Fire West in Madison. I coach at Functional Integrated Training in Fitchburg, and I'm not on the socials, so you have to find me in person. That's where I'd like to connect.
I love it. So hopefully, if you're listening and you're dying to connect, you can find us in Madison, Wisconsin. Karen, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to put into the space, or for the listener, or for our time?
Just one more short little quote, and it's not mine, but it moved me. When I was in Montana last week, it was printed across a boarded-up hotel, and it's a quote from a French film artist whose name I can't remember right now, but it says, "Make visible what without you the world might never otherwise see." Thank you, Bets.
Thank you.
I love you.
I love you. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
By Firelight is a Lit Path Studios production and is produced by Jamie Gale and Betsy Delzer. Music is by Legito Music and Pond 5. Thank you for being a part of our beautiful collection of stories.